in terms of the Mastic0re exploits, and this is brought to us by Jailbreak. So, of course, this is the exploits using the Star Wars Racer Revenge game that was hoping to be chained with the kernel exploits to be able to jailbreak higher firmwares on the PS5 above 10.01 up to firmwares up to 12.0. That was the general idea, because, of course, the Mastic0re exploit has the dupe privileged syscall that's needed for a userland exploit to be able to trigger the kernel exploit to jailbreak the console. Now, we actually got a pretty positive update initially from developer Jailbreak here showing Lua core finished, from PS2 EMU escape to chaining Lua code execution with full primitives. We'll prepare a GitHub in a few days. So everything was looking good. It looked like the userland exploit was essentially done, and then it was just a case of chaining it with the kernel exploit, and then we'd have a jailbreak that we could use with this Star Wars game. However, over the past couple of hours, we got an update from Jailbreak here saying, so we have a situation, Mastic0re does have the dupe privilege, but at some point firmware 8.xx, so some firmware around there, Sony has removed the network socket privilege from the PlayStation 2 emulator. Now for kernel read-write primitive, past exploits used the IPv6 sockets, and Mastic0re cannot use that, so we need some kind of alternative. So, not looking good. Now you can see in the initial video that was posted showing the userland exploit up and running, we can see it is successfully mounting the save data for Lua transition, and then it transitions over to the Lua-based exploit, and you can see there we have a remote Lua loader running. So the idea is that it's using the Mastic0re exploit to unlock some kind of Lua execution within the game, or within the emulator, that can then allow it to run a remote Lua loader to execute Lua scripts that are sent over the network. But it looks like the netsockets function is not working on higher firmwares, which would prevent this remote Lua loader from working, and I believe that function or some other functions that are now blocked in these higher firmwares are needed for the poop splits to work, which would prevent this from being used to chain it with the poop split to jailbreak, unless some kind of alternative, method to load it can be found, some kind of alternative for these particular syscalls. If those can be, changed to something else that does work, then maybe there's still a chance for this exploit to survive. Now, I believe the issue is that, of course, Jailbreak here, you can see is on firmware 6.02, so the whole time this developer has been testing this on an older firmware 6.02, which is just, I guess, the firmware that their console happens to be on, and it was working fine on that particular firmware. But then you can see here, on the higher firmware, I guess this is being tested on when trying to invoke particular functions that are needed for the exploit here on higher firmwares. We can see these errors are appearing. Socket execute AF_inet6 failed. Function not implemented. Function not implemented. So it seems that Sony has removed some of these functions from the PlayStation 2 emulator, so they no longer exist and cannot be implemented. So this is a pretty big blow in the development of this exploit. We hope that some kind of alternative could be implemented or found, but it's certainly not looking good at this stage for higher firmwares with this exploit. So now this doesn't immediately mean that this exploit is completely dead in the water. Of course, other alternative functions could be found to make this work, and the poop split could be reworked to use those different functions in order to get that to work with it. So there's always a possibility that this could still end up turning into a working exploit to load the jailbreak on higher firmwares. But obviously that's going to take a lot longer because it's going to require a lot of research, and if an alternative is found, then the exploit's going to have to be completely reworked to use that alternative to get it working on higher firmwares. So I'll definitely keep my fingers crossed that some kind of alternative solution can be found, but it's certainly not looking great at the moment for this particular exploit. Now, it is working fine on the PS4, but not that that's really much of a consolation because, of course, the PlayStation 4 has other userland exploits at the PlayStation Vue exploit that's been implemented in the Blu-ray exploits, so this doesn't have that much utility on the PS4, and it's working on older firmwares on the PS5 below 8.x firmwares, but again, we have other jailbreaks we can use on those older firmwares anyway. So we also have some updates to the PlayStation Vue exploits, which is going to be used to jailbreak the PS4 up to firmware 13.0. Now, the first thing I saw in this was that there were some people getting confused about 13.02, as if 13.02 was going to be supported. The thing is, yes, the PlayStation Vue exploit may work up to 13.02 as a userland exploit, but the kernel exploit that we're triggering only works up to 13.0. That's the highest kernel exploit we have for the PS4 right now, which basically means we're only going to be able to jailbreak up to 13.0, because the kernel exploit is what actually jailbreaks the console, not the userland exploit. So just because PlayStation-VUE exploits may work up to 13.02, doesn't mean we're going to get a jailbreak up to 13.02, just 13.0 for now, until a new kernel exploit comes out that supports 13.02. So that's the situation there. But then as for actual updates, we've had a few pieces of information. First of all, Earth Onion has stated that the VUE userland exploit is actually very stable. So that's excellent news. We're getting a pretty stable entry point to trigger the kernel exploit. Now we also got some information from Dr. Yanyan outlining some of the challenges in getting this PlayStation-VUE exploit done and finished. So at the moment, there are several things that need to be bypassed, and we can see the progress that is made here. I'm just going to summarize it here in this video. So basically, we've got 4 screenshots showing some different prompts that appear when trying to load the PlayStation-VUE exploits that need to be worked around. So the first one is the sign into PlayStation Network to use network features. You'll get this if you try and launch the PlayStation-VUE application without an activated account. This, of course, can be worked around with the backup file, so when we restore the backup file, which contains the exploit in the PlayStation-VUE application, it will also contain a fake activated account, which will allow you to launch the application to bypass this error, so that's already essentially being solved. Now, the second prompt that you get when PlayStation-VUE is loaded is this one. This service requires you to sign into PlayStation Network. Currently, this does not appear if you're actually using a proper PSN activated account, but for fake activated accounts, you will get this prompt, and you just click OK, and it should then start running the exploit. Then they also had to bypass this prompt, so there is a network communication issue. The service is not responding, click OK to try again, or quit the application using the PS button. So apparently this one is bypassed via the save file, something added to the save file that allows us to bypass this, which is also present in the POC that was released by Earth Onion. And then the final prompt, and this is the one that isn't bypassable at the moment, which is that there is a problem connecting to the internet. Check the connect to internet setting in settings network and that you are connected to the internet. Click OK to try again. This is what happens if you're not connected to the internet. So in its current form, you need an internet connection on the PS4 to be able to get by this prompt. So you will not receive this prompt and you'll be able to actually get the PlayStation-VUE application running to execute the exploit. So that's the kind of last hurdle at the moment for the VUE application, is bypassing this. Maybe some way to bypass this so that you can still use it offline, because at the moment it requires an internet connection, and this is all going on while the kernel exploit is also being ported at the same time. So work is still ongoing importing the net control exploit from the flow, while a more efficient version of the userland exploit is trying to be created to, bypass these prompts as well. So those are our PlayStation-VUE updates so far. A few other interesting updates. We got the release of Shadow Mount from Void Whisper, which was then subsequently deleted not long after. So Shadow Mount is a payload that kind of acts more like a plugin that runs in the background and allows you to automatically mount your PlayStation 5 or PlayStation 4 game dumps. But generally, the idea is that you run this payload, preferably when you load the jailbreak so that you don't have to send it separately, and then whenever you load any game backups onto, say, your USB drive, external hard drive, or transfer it over to the console's internal storage or an M.2 drive, the payload runs in the background and it's automatically scanning and those directories and those locations where you typically store your game dumps. And then it will detect if a new game has been added, and it will automatically create the shortcut on the homepage to be able to run that game backup. It's really easy, especially if you're loading your games onto like a USB storage of some kind. You can just copy your game dump folders on, plug the USB drive into your PS5, and with that payload running, it will automatically detect that new games have been added. It'll create these shortcuts automatically on the homepage, and you can load them directly from the home menu and get your game dumps running. It's really the most convenient way to get your game dumps running on the PS5 at the moment. Now, there was an update to version 1.3, which now scans more locations, including the root directories of your USB drive, M.2. Then all of a sudden, the whole project, I think including the account, was removed from GitHub. The account is back and the Shadow Mount project's back, but the release is still missing, although maybe has been updated by now. There we go, it's back now. I just refreshed the page, it's back. Okay, so there we go. So we're now on version 1.3b, so we can see what was included here. This release has been reposted after being flagged. Okay, so it was flagged. That's why it was removed from GitHub, but it is now restored. So you can now access it here. I did upload a separate link so people could still access the files when the project was down, but now it is back up on the official repo, so you can go ahead and just download it directly from here. So definitely a useful payload for running your PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 game backups, but you do need to make sure you're using KStuff version 1.6.7 in order for this to work. And of course, you can update the version of KStuff within ETA-hen in the KStuff menu by using the option to download the latest KStuff version from GitHub, and then reloading the jailbreak, and ETA-hen will then load that latest version of KStuff that's compatible with this payload. So that's the other development, and again, I have a full tutorial breaking down how to set up that payload. Now, in other news, we also got the release of this YouTube Jailbreak WebUI from Nasky. So Nasky is getting into PS5 development, which is great. So we can see we've got the ability to manage the YouTube jailbreak using a web UI. So I haven't really had a lot of time to look into this, but I believe the idea is that it runs a web server on, some device on your local network. And then from there, the YouTube jailbreak, when it loads, it reaches out over the network, and this web server will respond by sending whatever payloads you want it to load. So you can update this payloads folder with any payloads that you want a YouTube jailbreak to load. And then when the web server is running and you run the YouTube jailbreak on the PS5, it will receive those payloads and execute them one by one. I believe that's the general idea. Now, you could also perhaps use this to update the exploit itself whenever there's any new updates available. And we can also see there's an update here showing another update to the web UI of a payload injector that can be used to remotely send payloads to the console. And we can see here sending the Shadow Mount Beta version 1.3, and that payload being successfully executed on the console too. So that's an update there from Nasky. This is using just regular YouTube jailbreak, I believe, not implemented with the auto loader, but there may be some kind of update in the future that implements this with the auto loader version as well. And finally, we've seen a drastic improvement to FTP speeds with a new FTP payload from Drakmor on the PS5. And it's also been updated to also support the PS4 as well. So there's a PS4 payload for PS4 and a PS5 payload. But obviously the PS5 is definitely the console that needs the improved speed. So if we take a look at the normal transfer rates with FTP with ETA-hen, so when I connect via ETA-hen on port 1337, and I try and transfer a package file from my computer to my PS5 into the data ETA-hen folder, you can see that this is a 24 gigabyte file, and when I transfer it, the speed starts off high, and then it just craters all the way down to about 5 megabytes per second, and it's telling me it's going to take about 1 hour and 17 minutes just to transfer a 24 gigabyte file, and this is on a direct wired connection, so I should be getting much higher transfer rates. So this is the issue. Now, sometimes these speeds are higher than this. They're about 20 to 30 megabytes per second sometimes, but in this case, quite often it seems to get capped at about 5 megabytes per second, so that is just obviously far too slow. So with this new payload, if we send this new FTP payload instead, and then we repeat the same test by copying the same 24 gigabyte file over to the same location, you can see that the speed stays high at about 75 megabytes per second, thereabouts, and we're getting much faster transfers rates, and it's saying it's only going to take about 5 minutes now to transfer that 24 gigabyte files, so much faster than the FTP server built into ETA-hen and some of the other FTP payloads that we've had in the past. Now, beyond that, another big advantage of this is that it does seem to be more stable with simultaneous transfers as well. So when you're transferring folders that have hundreds or thousands of files in them, it can take a long time if it's just transferring like 2 at a time. Whereas in FileZilla, you can go into the FTP settings, into the transfer settings, and you can change the number of simultaneous connections up to, I think, 10 is the maximum. And then when you transfer a folder that has thousands of files in it, it will transfer them at 10 files at a time, which is going to get them transferred a lot faster. It would normally cap out to about 5 simultaneous transfers, whereas with this, we can go up to the maximum and get 10 transferred at a time, which as you can see is transferring thousands of files a lot faster. So if you've got big folders with thousands of files on them, this can also help to get those transferred over. Although it's still not recommended to use FTP to transfer your games, I would highly recommend using items flow to copy your game dumps from a USB to the internal storage or an internal M.2 drive instead. That's going to do it for this one. Just a quick update here, so I hope you guys enjoyed